Hey everybody, it's Tuesday, July 3rd. I hope you're up and at it and enjoying this holiday weekend. Well, hey, we're going to continue our series on the crushing times, things that have us pressed but not perplexed. We might be in despair, but hopefully not destroyed. And so this comes out of 2 Corinthians 12. I just want to read out of the King James Version this today because, 2 Corinthians 4:8, because I know that this is such a great verse, and so many of us struggle through these times of crushing times, pressing times. And like I said yesterday, we were going to talk a lot about the olive branch, the olive tree, the olive itself, because I think it's such a great picture of our lives of when we feel like we are so pressed in. So let me read it, 2 Corinthians 4:8. This is out of the King James Versions. It says, "We are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed." So many times our life feels like it is crushing in on us. Circumstance, trouble, relationships, all those things that have us feeling like we're in the press, so to speak, that we're in this time that we feel like the weight of the world is on us and we just can't get out from underneath the weight. And so God says here in 2 Corinthians that, you know what, you might be feeling that pressure, but you do not have to be crushed and destroyed by it. You know what, you might be perplexed about some things. And let me just note this, that confusion never comes from God. If you're confused about something, more times than not, it's from the enemy who's trying to trip you up. If you're confused, go to God in prayer and say, Lord, what is it? Give me truth and give me wisdom that you want me to have, that I should know. I love this verse too, Casey. She says it's one of my favorites. I do too, because I think it says to us that even though we can feel like the weight of the world is on us, is that we don't have to go away being defeated. We don't have to be in despair. We don't have to slip into that pit, so to speak, that we talked about last week, that we can rise up and even though we feel that pressure, we talked a little bit about the molding of the clay yesterday and how the potter does that. He has to do that for a reason, to get out the air holes, to make us so that we can be perfect. So when we're put into the kiln, when we're put into the fire, that we will come forth as a beautiful vessel. And the same goes along with the olive and the olive tree, the branches, and how we can get beautiful olive oil, which is so well known all over the world, more so all over the world than in the Western part of the world where we are. I mean, yes, we use it, but in the Eastern culture, that's all they use in the Mediterranean. So today I just want to talk to you about the pressing process, and there's three parts of it. That the crushing times are necessary, they are for the processing, and then they're for the preservation. So let's talk on that real quick so we can get through this today and you guys can get about your day, because I'm sure you got lots of holiday plans and work and fun in the sun. So let's just talk about that. And one thing, I know none of us ever sign up for it. I said that yesterday, and those are not the things that we post up on Instagram or Facebook or, show our best side when we are being crushed and pressed in on every level. That's never what we tend to share. But one of the things we should share is when we're going through those stressful times, it's a really great time to have a friend, a good friend, a godly friend that can help you through that with good counsel. So I want to just encourage somebody who's out there that might be struggling today, that feels the weight of the world is on their shoulders. Reach out to somebody, find somebody that you can walk along with you. But so let's dig in. So many times, and this is just a known fact in the Mediterranean, and the olive tree has to live with two kinds of winds. In order for it to produce the fruit that it wants, it has to have the east wind, which is a hot, dry wind. This can blow in and blow green, healthy grass completely over, and it can wither up in a day. So how many of us have been through life and know even that metaphor, where the heat, the desert-like winds, we're just kind of parched and we're in this dry and empty place. And we need that so we can reach out to God. That's where we thirst for him and know that he's our only solution. He's only going to give us relief. And I believe that's true here, that the olive tree has to have that. And whether we like it or not, we have to have it too. And then there's the west wind for the olive tree that comes in from the Mediterranean. And that's what brings the rain and the life to the tree. Two complete opposites, and so many times we need that too. If everything were to be sunny all the time and happy all the time, our lives would dry up and it would be nothing but a desert wasteland. And if it rained all the time, we would be drowned out and soggy and under the water where nothing would grow either. So God knows in his sovereignty that we need both. We need the dry and the hot, and we need the rain that brings life. So when those seasons come in your life, don't despair and don't be discouraged and don't even be upset, because it's a necessity to get you to grow into what he wants you to have, just like the olive tree. The olive needs both of these winds, so we have to know that when we have them in our life, when we observe them, when we have to take on, let's say, the storms of the world, we talked about that a couple weeks ago, that's a necessary part for our growth. Then there's the crushing times that are the processing times. Now, how many of you love the process? I know I don't. There's a process that God puts us through so many times that we are like, when, God, when? And why, God, why? Why do I have to go through these times that are so troubling? Why do I have to go through the process of being in the refiner's fire that we've talked about? You know, the silversmith that does that stands over his pot of precious metal, whether that be gold or silver, and he will heat that up until the impurities rise to the top, and that's called dross. And when he can scrape the dross off the top, that's the impurities, then he can start to see the purity of the gold or the silver. And do you know the key to him knowing when his pot or his metal, his precious metal is exactly right? It's when he can see his reflection of himself in the pot. How many times has that process been that we hate, we despise? You know, the heat is up, it gets hotter and hotter. And he knows that if he turns up the heat too much, it can destroy the precious metal. Well, the same is for us. You know, God will allow the heat to be turned up in our lives so that we can experience the cleansing, the process, that the impurities rise to the top, and then he can scrape that dross off, so to speak, and then he can begin to see his reflection in us through him. So that's the process that we don't like. None of us sign up for. It's the part of the crushing and the pressing and the heating that we don't like, but it's a necessary step. And then there's the times of preservation. And this is the best way to preserve the olive for a long time. It must be crushed to extract the oils. For us to get pure virgin extra olive oil, it has to be pressed. So I love this process and just learning about this, because I think it's such a great picture of our own lives, that God wants us to preserve for the long haul. He wants us to be able to withstand the storms. He wants us to be able to come away with something precious from us that he can use for the rest of the world. And if we don't go through that process, how is it then that we will ever get to his use? Remember yesterday we talked about being his vessel. He's the potter, we're the clay. We don't get to vote on what we want to be. God does, because he's our creator, we're the creation. And so many times we play God in our own lives and we want to do our own thing, and we say, God, well, this is what I want to be. Many times people will pick careers and go to college or an assignment in their life, and they're like, this is what I want to do. But so many of us get into it and then we're like, I hate it, I want out. And the question or the thought would be, did you ever ask God what he had intended for your life? I know I've talked to kids where their parents say, you know, I want this for your life. I want you to be a doctor, an attorney, or I want you to be something. And one of the greatest disservices a parent can do for their own child is to tell them what they think they should do. That's a great process, is to pray through it and say, you know what did God create you for? Or as a student, pray to God and say, God, what do you have for me? You know, you've given me these gifts. What is it that you would have me do in my life for you, for what you've created me for? God has created you for a purpose in this world and this time in 2018 through this generation, whether we like it or not and where we're at. God has a great purpose for your life. So don't waste that. Don't misuse that. Don't be lazy about it, and don't sit around and waste the great gifts that he's given you, because he has this great purpose. It's just like the olive. It is a huge process. It has to take those heated winds. It has to take the storms from the rain. It has to take the crushing and the pressing. But then in the final end, it comes away with this beautiful product, this olive oil that is used all over the world for so many purposes. And it's so healthy. And it's such a great just creation that God's created. But that in itself doesn't come without a high cost. And I think the same is true for us. When we are born and we're raised and all through life experiences, if we will just be willing to allow God to put us through those processing times, put us through those crushing times, and even put us through those preserving times, we will come away as something great. Not in our own right, but in the right of the Lord, that he will give us the purpose that he has for our life. So I want to encourage you today, for those of you who feel like you are under the weight of the world, that let the winds come through. Let the pressing time come through. Even the crushing times. Don't resent that. Know that this is the process that God has for you to make you into something great. That you are not a waste. You are not to sit back and let life just pass you by and just to be a consumer. God wants you to be a giver of life. He asked you, he went to heaven and said, you're going to do greater things than me. I mean, can you imagine Jesus saying that to his disciples? I have to leave, and because of that, I'm sending the Holy Spirit, and I'm going to allow you to do more than you could ever possibly imagine or think through my power. And so by him leaving the earth and going back to heaven, he gives us the power to do what he can do. And I know that's a crazy thought because I can never get my own head wrapped around it. But it's not to say that he has a great plan for your life, and he has this process. And it may seem like you're in a holding pattern. You're in that preservation. You're like, God, when is something going to break? When is the weight of the world going to, let up? It's just like fine wine. It has to sit for years too. It has to sit for years too. And it doesn't have to, they say it's not good if it's taken right away. There is a process, and I don't want you to resent it. I want you to be encouraged by it, that God is doing a great and mighty work in your life if you'll just allow him today. So remember this in Isaiah 30:18, and I want to close with this for those of you who are discouraged and think that maybe God has forgotten you, and you feel like, God, did you leave the press button on and you walked away and forgot to come back and give it to me? I want you to think about this. Isaiah 30:18 says that the Lord longs to be gracious to you. And just a tag to that is, blessed are those who are willing to wait upon the Lord. Whether God has you in a good time or a bad time, he is watching over you. And he is like that silversmith that sits and doesn't leave the pot. He watches his precious gold. And that's what you are to him, a precious gem for him to use in his kingdom somewhere, somehow. He sits over the pot and watches for you to become at the right time that he can use you. So don't be discouraged. The heat may be on today. The weight may be heavy, but God is watching over you, and he longs to be gracious for you. So I just want to encourage somebody out there today that's just feeling that crushing, that pressing process. You feel perplexed and you're like, I don't get it, God. What gives? This is a great passage for you to dive into, 2 Corinthians 4:8. Read it, read all kinds of versions. There's really great descriptions of them. If you want to study further, get into a commentary and just dig into what God has to say. The olive was a great gift from God. And remember, when Jesus went the night before he was sold out by Judas, went to be crucified, it was there in the Garden of Gethsemane under an olive tree that Jesus cried out, Lord, not your will, but my will. He asked if this cup could pass from him. But he said those words that, all of hell would shake from. If we would give up our own will and say, God, whatever your will be done, that is what gets the enemy and all his little cronies shaken up, when we're willing to sacrifice our own lives and do the will of God. And it was when Jesus cried out that, even as he's sweating, blood droplets, that he said, Lord, whatever you will. It's under that olive tree, and in that pressing, I think it's such a great picture, that crushing in on him. The weight of the world's sin was crushing in on Jesus under an olive tree. Such a beautiful picture of, maybe you're feeling that today. Maybe you're in your own Garden of Gethsemane where despair is just heavy and you feel the weight of the world. Maybe it's your family, your relationships, your kids' decisions. Maybe it's something, a health report that's just awful, and you're like, God, what am I going to do? Would you allow that time to the pressing and the crushing that the Lord may be allowing at this time under his sovereign hand, because he is watching over you. He is there with you, and he cries out with you. He holds your right hand with his righteous right hand. He just wants you to know that he is there, and he does wait to be good to you, but just wait upon him. Get away with him, and just like Jesus did when he went to pray to his Father, go and be still in front of him, and he'll be there for you. So encourage you today to just jump into the Word and stay there close to God, because he's with you. So have a great Tuesday. We'll see you back here bright and early tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.